Everyone, welcome back to 2 Hours on a Sunday. I'm Brian.
And I'm Nick.
And today we're talking about an old classic from 1995, The Indian in the Cupboard.
Absolutely. So, Brian, I never watched this movie as a kid. Yesterday was my first ever viewing. What was your experience with it growing up?
Well, I had this movie on VHS, so I watched this movie frequently. And for everyone who hasn't seen it, it's about a young boy named Omri who gets a cupboard for his birthday. And it turns out the cupboard has magic abilities.
Yep.
And whatever toy or possession you may put into it, if you were to lock it and unlock it, it would come to life.
Yeah.
And so for someone like myself, now there's two different perspectives. There's adult me watching this and there's child me watching this. And it's two different viewings, let me tell you, because as a child, it's the coolest thing ever to think about your toys coming to life and acting on their own. And you know, as a kid, you want to create stories and, do all this adventurous stuff with your toys. So having them come to life and you just watching it happen be the most magical thing of all time. And yeah. I wish for it all the time. And it's like Toy Story. You wanted your toys to come to life. And anytime they fell over in the cabinet, you're like, okay, they were fighting while I was asleep.
Exactly.
But as an adult, it's a very different viewing experience.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's exactly kind of what you watched rather than what I watched growing up.
Absolutely. I feel like the way you said it is perfect. I think my kid brain or my creative brain like absolutely adored the movie. I love the premise. I love the idea of the mysticism of your toys coming to life, but also the kind of the adult side of me really gravitated towards like the seriousness of certain topics that they did bring up in the movie,
and they handled them very well.
They did. They really did. I think
serious topics for the time too.
Yes, absolutely. Like I really feel like the content of those topics was so important, and I think even like now it carries over. Like the idea of caring for your friends, taking care of the things that you have, not judging other people, and
based on cultural differences.
Exactly. And going into the world with a mindset of caring, not only for like others, but for yourself, like just taking care, I think in general.
Yeah. And really listening, right? Taking the time to learn.
Absolutely.
The stories of everyone around you.
Right. And I think for the majority of it, I think for all of it, the lessons to be learned from this movie are great and very timeless. The execution, I think in my adult brain, was a little bit different. And I will definitely get into that. And not for, I wouldn't say for the actors or like what the actors presented. I think they did an awesome job. It's also 1995.
Yeah. It was definitely, you could tell it was made in the 90s. Like it has that like family feel of the mid 90s.
Yes. I will not criticize the acting in it at all, because that wasn't the concern for me. More of the quality of the dialogue that I think could have elevated a great scene or a great message even higher than what we perceived it already. And that's what I think I did actually really enjoy about this movie. Even though there were some things that like just missed the mark in terms of like the message, they still conveyed it. And they still got the point across, I think, to young people and to people rewatching it. So I think with that, tell me if you agree. Like, do the messages still mean the same thing to you?
I don't think the dialogue being the way it is for you has really any impact on how they come across. Because I think, like, as a 10-year-old, you're not really paying that much attention to that. But as an adult, it really translates to you very easily.
Yes.
So I don't think the severity of how complicated the message of the dialogue is, they did it as easily as possible, like translating the message of the theme of the movie. I don't think it had to be in depth.
I agree.
Straightforward messaging for everyone to get a grasp of it as a family.
Yeah. I feel like they said the message in as few words as possible. That takes talent. That takes a lot of skill to do, rather than being super long-winded and saying not really that much or the same thing, essentially. So I think they did a good job with that for most of the movie.
But I also think that has to do with the people who worked on the film.
Yeah.
And the director, I don't know if you know, Frank Oz
Yeah.
is the director. And for anyone who doesn't know who that is, he was a puppeteer for the
Mm-hmm.
Star Wars films, and he was Yoda and the
Yes.
voice of Yoda. He also did the Muppets as well.
Yep.
But he was brought onto this film, and what I think they took great care into casting. And so they brought on Lightfoot,
Yep.
who is Cherokees of the Cherokee Nation.
Yep.
And they really went to him for cultural references and to make sure everything was appropriated correctly. And
Yes.
as well as bringing in teams of people for, you know, the music, the song, the language, as well as, you know, the clothing and what he would wear in that time period, as well as like the sets and all the set building. So they really wanted to make sure everything was correct towards the time period and make sure nothing was, you know, disappropriated towards his culture.
Right. And I think that is an important thing. Like we definitely have, I would say, even teams of people doing it nowadays. So it's good that they actually took care in referencing, asking, and doing it properly. I think everybody, regardless of who they might be, but if they have a passion or if they have a heritage that they get to see in film, I think it's really nice when you get to see it done well and with a lot of care. Like even for myself, like being a musician, like seeing music done well in movies or like the musicianship of a live performance, that makes the scene for me, because it's like, oh, they actually cared about that. They didn't just throw a bunch of people in there for the sake of having the background filled. So it's good that they did that.
And that also goes to like all the stories that he has himself, right?
Yes. It passes on the stories that not everybody is kind of afforded in life. We don't get to hear about a lot of First Nation stories, especially when we were kids. Like we had a couple classes in school and that was it. So getting to see
it was really only like grade 4 we had that kind of lesson, and that was it.
Exactly. So getting more of that even at an early age, I think is one, important, and two, quite, thoughtful and respectful, regardless of what topic it is.
And what's cool about Gary Davis, who is Little Bear in the film and Lightfoot as his Cherokee Nation name, is he went on to build an indigenous, production and film studio called Indigi Studios to help bring those stories to light all around the world, whether that be, television, documentary, or film style, just bringing the First Nations cultural, to light and making sure it's shown correctly. So the background of the story is that Omri brings to life this figure, this toy statue that his friend Patrick gives him. That's an Indian figure.
Yep.
Where these toys, they're not just toys. So whenever he brings them to life, their souls are brought from somewhere else. And his story is from 1761. And we learn that he's been granted, the lessons of English through his partnership with the British during the French Indian War back in 1761.
Yeah.
So that's how they can kind of like coexist and talk to each other.
Right.
Little Bear thinks that Omri is some great spirit because in the movie, Little Bear is the size of a toy, whereas Omri, the boy, he's the size of a regular human. For those of you who don't know, how they managed to pull this off is a technical term called compositing.
Yes.
And compositing in post-production in making a movie is when you combine multiple scenes, say you filmed it separate times, into one scene. So for this, you would film the boy in his room with the set piece as one scene, and then on another side, they built sets to scale on, say, how it would translate on camera so that Lightfoot could be interactive in that scene. Or sometimes they would do it on blue screen and they put them together. So they would take his footage and composite it, put it together with Omri's footage in order to create that seamless scene. And for 1995, let me tell you, ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, crushed this movie.
It's mind blowing. Like it still looks good. Like I watched it yesterday. I'm like, oh no, this can pass.
Yeah,
like,
100% could pass.
It's so
and
good.
I think it does it well because all the Little Bear scenes, they film him on actual sets.
Yes.
Aside from a couple of different points where they're shooting wide angles of, say, Omri's bedroom and they just composite him into the bedroom.
Yes.
But anytime he's like in the cupboard or like in the grass or say in his little area where he builds his hut.
Yep.
That's all built
It's all a set
for him, so they can just like composite it into the scene and it looks seamless.
Yep. It looked it looked so good. Like, yeah, his hut looked awesome, and it looked. I was thinking, oh yeah, this is supposed to be like twigs and sticks from the yard. Like, they actually made gigantic sticks. It's not like pieces of wood. It looks like gigantic sticks.
Yeah, well, they probably just cut trees down
Well,
for his,
maybe,
for his
yeah.
part. They built a hut for him,
right?
To size, and then when it, they scaled it down, it looks like miniature sticks.
Yeah, and
but
like
even his cabin that he built,
exactly. Well, and the cupboard itself. So he was in like a cupboard scene, right?
Yes.
Okay, he wasn't green screened into that for the most part. Like,
some scenes he was kind of green screen, but they already had him. They built like a blue screen,
yes,
kind of deal for him to be to the scenes where Omri's looking in the cupboard. But when, say, the scene where they open up the cupboard and you have Darth Vader and the T-Rex and all the guys doing that,
yep,
I feel like those were scenes composited into the cube of the cupboard. So
gotcha.
like they built the background and then they just had them kind of act in motion and then composite them into the cupboard. So there was kind of a mix of both.
Right. I think that's what makes the scenes look so good, is because they're mixing both of those kind of styles together. And it looks honestly relatively seamless in all of them. They don't look like, oh, that's like a green screen, that one looks like a set. They're really close. I feel like they do a good job in all aspects of it.
What's crazy is the scene when he enters Omri's hand.
Oh, right at the beginning when we were introduced to him?
When we are introduced to him. So for people who don't know, a trick of the trade is to hide your compositing lines. And filmmakers and directors who know how to do special effects know the tricks. So instead of just having your hand placed out normally, they had Omri's hand raise his thumb just a little bit so they can cut off where Little Bear's hands and feet would contact with his hand. Yep. So it would be a seamless transition. So it would actually look like he was in his hand while the camera would track him around. And there'd be no, like, you couldn't see him shaking on his hand or anything. So I think subtle tricks like that, and even the scene when you're in Omri's room and there's a far shot, like a camera pan that goes around a cabinet and you see Little Bear working on his hut.
Yep.
So in order to do that properly, you would have to film Little Bear like 100 feet back with a camera.
Yeah.
To make that track work. But because they started it so far back in Omri's room and track around this cabinet blocking the way, they only had to do it so far away to make it actually work seamlessly.
Oh, okay.
Because when you come around, he's sitting, because they filmed it on a blue screen. So he was sitting on this kind of blue makeshift house that he was building, and then this blue kind of beam that he was sitting on. So they tracked that into the scene, but because of where they put the camera and that chest that blocked some of the camera view, that helped kind of make that transition seamless, because the camera didn't have to be so dramatically far away to actually film Little Bear in full size, right?
That is so cool. I didn't know how that one was achieved, because that was one of the ones I was like, hold on a minute, that's really cool.
Corridor Crew actually did a video on it where they talked about the compositing of Little Bear in Indian in the Cupboard. It was like a month ago or something. It was super cool.
I'm gonna check that out then.
But also the behind the scenes on the Blu-ray that just came out for the anniversary, they show all the stuff of them building the sets and filming them in different locations. It's pretty cool.
That's cool. Yeah, the hand one, I noticed. I was like, I see the thumb up. It, for the movie, it looks fine, but like it would feel unnatural to do that. So I'm like, that must be they're hiding like.
Yeah. But then again, that's how you would kind of cup something if it was small, right?
True.
But then again, that is a good trick for someone who knows special effects to be like, I want this shot to look, because it's the money shot of the movie.
It really is.
There's a lot of money shots, but that's the first money shot to really sell the movie.
Yep.
Is how small he is in connecting with Omri.
It definitely it connected for me. I was like, that's it.
Yeah. The music in this movie is so good.
It's so like uplifting. It's like motivational. It just swells all the time. I love it.
Another little thing they did is so there's a character in the movie called Boone.
Yes,
and
the cowboy.
He is a cowboy. And what's interesting about this film is they talk about the cowboys and the Indians.
Yeah.
So when Boone gets brought to life by Omri's friend Patrick, who we'll get into later.
Yeah. Oh, yes, we will.
He wouldn't be my friend
No.
The way he was acting in this movie, he would not be my friend
So
anymore.
irresponsible.
Yeah, irresponsible. He betrayed my trust, everything. But he brought Boone to life. And back in the day, that's, cowboys did not approve of Indians, as everybody knows. And so they start having this fight, but it's epic to them, but in the grand scheme of things, it's so small because they're just toy size.
Yeah.
But they actually built a giant shoe so that Boone can stand behind it to composite it into the scene. So there's some scenes where the shoe is those two are green screen into the scene.
Yeah.
But there's other shots where he's actually behind a big shoe.
No
so they
kidding.
did both. Yeah, they did everything to make it correct. And I think another crazy compositing is when Omri picks Boone up off the ground and places him on the bed. It's done so seamlessly.
He puts him on the post, right?
Yeah.
I was like, what the heck is that? How
Yeah.
did they do that one?
He had to have had picked something up. There must have been some kind of like fabric he had in his hand to actually pick him up, and then they just kind of composite him on top. Like they probably lifted the actor Boone, who played Boone, in blue screen up with his collar, like so. Then they just did this, like matched it together.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Jeez. Yeah, because that one was also one of those impressive moments for sure. Now, there's definitely a couple of tense moments in the movie. I have 3 in mind. There's some of my favorite parts. One of them is obviously my favorite part, but I want to know a couple of your favorite like scenes and why.
So there's a few. Obviously, the scene when they first meet.
Yeah.
When he turns the cabinet and he's hiding and the little bear's hiding in the cabinet, and then they interact with the hand.
Yep.
But there's one scene that's not intense or like story driven.
Mm-hmm.
It's where he brings little bear outside.
Yes.
And he lets him go hunt.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was about how they filmed that in general, but it looked amazing. He just drops him and he walks through the grass.
Yeah.
And then there's this part where he like opens up and you see him like walk across the top, and then like he's hunting this deer because he brought a deer to life in the cabinet.
Yes.
But the whole thing, I was like, I have no clue how they did that or
Yep.
composite it that well to make it look so real. But my other 2 favorite scenes had to have been the scene where Boone gets shot with an arrow.
Yep.
The scene is tragic because my other favorite scene before that is when Boone and Little Bear are talking in a pouch.
Yep.
Because Omri brought them to school. And it's just this moment of silence for them two just having to sit together.
Yep.
And be in the same spot, realizing their mistakes and learning about each other, because he asks Little Bear if he had a wife, and she sadly passed away. And then they both have a connection with that. And he asks Little Bear, will you ever find another wife, or that kind of thing? And they both kind of learn about each other. So it's that kind of thing where you don't jump to conclusions about somebody, or if you sit down with them and have a dialogue, and then at the end of the scene, they laugh and become friends, which is it's like the middle point of the movie. And it's a groundbreaking part for them because their whole lives, they've been known to fight against one another.
Yes.
And the following scene, when Omri and Patrick are having a sleepover and they're watching TV, they put on a film of cowboys and Indians where the Indian tribe is getting, what would you say, just massacred. And to Boone, that is all he knows. To him, he's just hooting and hollering. He says, "Get 'em, boys." And then to Little Bear, it cuts to him and he's walking slowly, and there's like lightning in the background because they're trying to set the mood.
Yep.
But he's staring at the television like he's watching his people die.
Yeah.
And it's this whole thing, and he doesn't know what a TV is.
Right.
So he thinks it's real, and he's like pointing his bow and arrow, and the screen's
like
moving back
at
and
the
forth.
screen. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's trying to fight for his people.
Yep.
And then Boone fires his gun off, and the Little Bear doesn't realize what happened. So he turns around because he's been listening to that for the past 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And he fires an arrow, and it hits Boone right in the chest.
Yep.
And what's sad about it is because they had just become friends, and before he falls, doesn't he call him like a little buddy or something?
Yeah.
And he's like,
does he call him buddy?
And he starts crying, and he's like, he knew he didn't do it on purpose, and he just falls to his death. And it's so sad. Now, spoiler alert, he doesn't die, because during the movie, they bring a toy medic into the cabinet, open him up, Thomas. They bring Thomas in, and he heals him, because before that, Little Bear had an injury and they had to bring him back. They do the same for Boone later, but the problem is they lose the key to the cabinet. So they're panicking because they don't have the key to bring the medic back to life in order to save Boone's life. So those two scenes, then obviously the final scene in the movie, which if you think about it from an adult perspective, it's so tragic when Little Bear and Omri part ways.
Yes.
In the dialogue they have between themselves, but I want to save that for the end.
Honestly, yeah, I'm on board with both of those scenes. The connection that Boone and Little Bear develop in the fanny pack is so great. Because yeah, they learn a little bit about each other. Well, I think Boone learns quite a lot about Little Bear, and they share a moment of silence with each other. And I think to me, that is, I think, one of the coolest parts of the movie, because yeah, it doesn't take filling the air with conversation to really connect with somebody sometimes. And I think they did that so well. And then
at the end of it, he's like, damn. And then because they were listening to the professor or something, but after they had their heart to heart, and then they had a big laugh together. And it's crazy how much a short conversation can do for a scene like this.
Exactly. And yeah, that the scene after when they were watching the movie and Little Bear was obviously very traumatized by it, and the totally opposite reaction that Boone had, it just was, it was so good. Like, that is definitely, you're just like, oh no, this just doesn't feel right. Something's gonna happen here. Probably my two favorite scenes in the movie. I did actually really like also the scene where Patrick had the pack and they were leaving class, and he was showing the other kids, which I think brings us to talking about Patrick.
He's the worst.
He's the worst. I will say this. He most likely did carry that entire volcano project on his own shoulders, because Omri was too busy playing with Little Bear the night before, and then all of a sudden we had this big volcano made.
Listen,
but still,
production took care of that.
Exactly. But yeah, and Omri was like, he was like overwhelmed, like with emotion, trying to convince Patrick to not show the teacher without like spilling the beans.
Yeah, because Patrick didn't really think or care to know how big this situation is. Like,
yeah,
to keep it a secret.
Exactly. He doesn't. Yeah, he's a kid. He's like, look at these cool toys. They're alive.
Yeah, because he wants to be the popular one.
Exactly. When that could have like what those big consequences would be, I don't know. I'd be like, that's amazing. Take care of them.
Yeah.
But to a kid, you don't want to show the parents because they might take it away.
Yeah.
So I that scene was very, very cool. That was a tense scene. Because I was like, oh, is he gonna show him?
Because it is two sides of a coin, right? Like, Omri is clearly one side of, that's his possession, right? He wants to take care of his toys / the magic that he has possessed with this cupboard.
Yeah.
Whereas Patrick is also one to be like a kid in your friend group to be like, oh, I'm definitely telling somebody about this.
Right.
It's very real, but also he betrayed Omri's trust, right?
Exactly. So Patrick's kind of dealing with two things here. Well, three things technically. He's like, do I want to be the popular kid and show everybody these cool moving toys? Do I want to protect my friendship and the responsibility that Omri has and not show anybody, including the teacher, but also potentially get in trouble if I don't show the teacher what I've got in the bag? So it's like, he's in a really tricky spot until Omri's like, they're just plastic toys, yelling into the bag. And then everything gets solved from there. Question.
Yes.
Do you think Patrick did the right thing to pull them out of the bag?
Well, I think he had to have opened it. He had to open the bag because the teacher would have taken it from them anyway.
Yeah.
Like, because clearly they were making a fuss like something was way worse in the bag than it would have been. But if they weren't fighting in the first place, this wouldn't have been a problem.
Right.
So it all stems from Patrick betraying him earlier.
It really does. It so does.
Because if the teacher doesn't look in the bag, he's sending it to the principal's office for the principal to do it anyway.
Right.
So and it's a lose-lose for them. So they obviously just had to do it and come up with a clever way to make it just look like their toys. And He shouldn't have brought them. He shouldn't have brought them to school. That kind of thing. Now, there's a big theme in the movie, not towards the cowboys and Indians and becoming aware of the surroundings and teachings of other cultures. But at the beginning of this movie, we find Omri really excited about the potential that this cupboard has. And towards the end of the movie, where he really, I think, learns a lesson. Now, I want to know if you actually think he learned a lesson about the consequence of bringing these toys to life. Because at the beginning, he would bring them to life just to grab, say, a weapon, basically kill them, and then throw the toy away. Right. Whereas towards the end of the movie, where he was going to bring a wife for Little Bear to life, and he told him not to do it because you have to think about where she's coming from. She has a family in her life, and you can't just mess with other people's lives without any consequence. So do you think Omri learned a lesson where you can't just play with someone's life as easily as like he did at the beginning compared to what he learned from Little Bear, where every life is sacred?
That's a good question. I think I would hope based on his...
Did you notice that
I
switch
did.
with him? Yeah.
I did, yeah, because I think the most obvious part of that was when he brought Thomas back to help Boone, or to help Boone get better. He was kind of grappling with that. He didn't have any husks. He didn't have anything to help Little Bear take care of him. He kind of gets now, I think even at this point, it could affect somebody very differently than how it affected him. Because
he was teaching his son at where he was back in his time period.
Right.
He was teaching him to hunt. So he took him away from that situation. Whereas, his family's also in danger at that point because they no longer have their father around.
And I think that him choosing not to do that was, I think, this story's way of saying he did learn to say there is responsibility that I have here. So I'm not going to abuse it.
Right. Yeah. Because I think even at the end of the movie, when he says goodbye to Boone and Little Bear, I think he's done with the cabinet.
For sure.
Like he locks it for good.
Yes. I don't think he ever opens it again for that reason. There's no ambiguity about it. It's like he learned something. He's learned about caring and responsibility, and he's done with it.
Because he learned that also when he brought the chief to life.
Yes.
And then the chief passed away because he had a heart attack because he was spooked of what was going on, and then Little Bear had to care for him and then bury him to give him a proper death.
Yeah.
But then I think Omri really learned like these are real people that he's bringing to life, that he's taking them from a different period.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's a good question. I really like that one. It's not one of those things you think about actively when you're watching the movie, but that's what they're trying to convey to you.
You don't realize how heartbreaking it is, the very last words they share together, until you really think about it. Because they're about to say goodbye. Little Bear looks at Omri and he says, "Are we a great people?" And Omri responds with, "You are always a great people, but it's not always so good." Because he's going back to 1700, right? Where Omri is currently in the 90s.
Yep.
And Little Bear asks Omri, "Will things change for us?" And Omri says they will. And the music starts swelling and they have this like look of concern towards each other, like they know what's going on. And then Little Bear yells now, and then he shuts the cabinet and locks it. But I think the moment you realize that Omri knows he's sending Little Bear back to danger, essentially, because they're in the middle of a war, but Little Bear may not make it in the future, like going forward. Like he's sending him to a time where his people are not
they're not going to essentially going to be thriving.
Yeah.
Right.
Compared to
what they were before, colonialism. And now that you bring that up, that interaction or that exchange was very melancholy. Like it's not a happy goodbye.
No.
It's a very uncertain goodbye or at least for Little Bear, because Omri's been doing his research. Yes. He wanted to know more about their culture.
Because he was writing a paper for it for school.
Exactly. And he knows what's to come for them.
Right. But he still ensures him that they are great people,
right,
no matter what time period it is.
Yeah.
And I think it cuts back to Omri in school going over his presentation, and he's worried about Little Bear. So it cuts to this great scene for the first time, Omri and Little Bear in the forest, and Little Bear's full grown, and they're like in the same room together,
yes,
but in full scale. And it really makes him at ease that Little Bear's okay and he's with his family. And So
Yes.
it is a happy ending, but it's also tragic at the same time that he had to send him back to a period of time where things
Exactly.
weren't so good. And what I think this movie does well also is anytime we come back from, say, Omri's school, or we're coming back into his bedroom, we're always coming in on Little Bear, kind of teaching the audience a little bit more about his culture.
Yeah.
Like the scene where he's dancing on the fire and he's singing the songs, or he's building the hut and he's talking about all the stories that he's gone through, or like building the actual house shed that he would, live in. It's like it's all this stuff that we're learning about his culture without intentionally kind of pushing it on the audience. It's like it's a nice, subtle way of us to learn more about how they live their lives.
They were skilled. They were adept at, being resourceful, taking from the land, building houses. They knew how to take care of themselves with like traditional medicines. Yeah, you're right. Every time he came back from school, he was always doing something different, and it highlighted the strengths of like the First Nations in how they lived before.
And it was always in a positive light as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
The whole time, it's like as an audience, we're watching, this journey for Omri and Little Bear. But at the same time, Omri is writing a paper on the indigenous culture. So it's like he's learning the same time we're learning about Little Bear giving teachings to Omri. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
It's a full circle thing.
Coming at this now from a relatively modern perspective, we've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of movies from different eras. If you were to say redo this movie, not so obvious, like don't touch the visuals. I would honestly, I think redoing this movie in modern visuals would take away from its charm. I would do it exactly like it is. But would you change anything?
I don't know if I would change anything. I think maybe a couple like how scenes play out with like Omri in the school, or like Omri like in his family and his brothers. But I wouldn't change anything about his interactions with Little Bear, because I think every time Little Bear and Boone were on the screen, that's when the magic was happening. I don't think he needed do you think he needed a friend? Because like he wanted to keep it from his parents, but I don't think you would needed to change much, other than maybe a couple dialogue scenes. Like Patrick and his mom comes to Omri's rescue after that bully shows up out of nowhere. I think there's some scenes you could like cut around and like rework in order to give more weight to why the cowboy was coming in. Like he just appeared with a cowboy in his hand. I think they could have reworked some stuff like that, but anything to do with Boone and Little Bear together, or like Omri and Little Bear, that stuff I wouldn't touch at all. I think it's just other little scenes to help bring the story together, or even cut some scenes out to make it flow more, but nothing to do with Little Bear.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Nothing about Omri and Little Bear's interactions should be changed. And even Boone's. I think it's the other kind of components of Omri's life that could have been either streamlined or kind of pared down. So for me, Patrick doesn't necessarily need to be a big role. He could be like a friend.
So here's the thing. Here's something I don't know if they plan this at all.
Yeah.
But as you were talking, I was like, Patrick is there for a purpose.
Yeah.
And here's my reasoning. He's there for the same reason that Boone is there. So Boone and Little Bear have their relationship, but Omri and Patrick are just Little Bear and Boone in the real world, where Patrick doesn't know the severity of what he's doing.
Yeah.
It's like the scene between Boone and Little Bear in the pouch, where they have that dialogue and they really come together as friends and understand each other.
Yeah.
So Patrick is just Boone before Boone realized who Little Bear was. Like this innocent, like this kind of reckless nature about him, where he doesn't really care about the circumstance or the consequence of showing.
Right.
And same the way that Boone comes into play, where he doesn't care. He just comes in, gun slinging.
Yeah.
He doesn't really care about the Indians at that point. It's kind of like
the
kid version of what they're dealing with in the real world. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
I do. I'll try and rephrase it. Boone doesn't seem to care much about being in like the big world, where Little Bear is like, Omri is like, he might be a god, controlling everybody's destinies here. But Boone's just like watching, the music video, and he's like, that's obscene or whatever.
Yeah.
And like he everything is just kind of like passing over his head. There's not
Because
really
he's
any,
reckless.
yeah, there's no real consequences to it. And that's Patrick, like, to us in the real world. I get it. I get it.
You know, because then
Yeah.
eventually he understands what Omri's talking about.
Right.
And then he does, after the scene with Boone dying,
Mm-hmm.
before he gets help from the medic,
Yep.
it's like Patrick finally realizes what Omri was talking about, that these are real people.
Right. Yes. That I do get that. I think we could
Like Boone thinking like Little Bear is a real person. Like they're not enemies.
Yes.
You know,
Yes. That makes sense.
it's just
I
in
like
different,
that.
it's just in different ways. Like I'm just trying to bring reason to why Patrick was there.
You're trying to like bridge them in,
Yeah.
and that honestly does make sense in terms of their kind of reckless nature for sure.
Also, side note, Adri wanted me to tell you this. So as we were watching this movie together a couple weeks ago, when Little Bear first shows up, she was like, he can get it. Like, he's attractive. She's like, Little Bear can get it. And she immediately followed him on Instagram and just started looking up like what he's like, his story and like what he's done. But like at the time, she was like, man,
Just smitten.
just smitten.
That's hilarious.
Oh,
With his like his back hairdo there.
His
That was-
ponytail, yeah.
His pony, that was awesome.
Yeah.
That's so funny. But yeah, I was like, honestly, he has like very striking, like serious eyes. I'm like, whoa. You see him at first, you're like, he means business.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Plus, it comes off well in his acting, right?
Oh,
All
absolutely.
the serious scenes and how he delivers his lines. He did a great
Yes.
job.
He
Carried
so
the
good.
movie, let's be real.
We did kind of gush over all of the Little Bear moments and the Boone moments in the movie. But what is your overall thought, or what are your overall thoughts of Indian in the Cupboard?
I think it's a timeless classic. Yeah, there's 90s written all over it, right? The dialogue and the writing. But like you can go back to this anytime just for the messaging and story alone. Like I don't
Agreed.
think you're not going to shy away from rewatching it just because of say the kids or like how it was done. Like a lot of movies in the 80s and 90s were done really well. This is a testament to that. And I think the story holds up no matter what time period it is. And the fact that the special effects were as good as they were and how they hold up today, you can't. It's definitely a 4 out of 5 all day long.
Yeah, the messages hold true to today for kids and for adults.
I think more so adults. Like,
Yeah,
kids will understand it, but like,
the adults will get it.
yeah,
Yeah, and it'll resonate.
because there's secret messaging behind the dialogue.
Right.
Like with the last 4 lines of dialogue between him and Little Bear,
Yeah, that's
right? The consequence of those lines, you really understand the weight and realize what he's going back to and
Mhm.
the whole story. But yeah, it definitely holds up for a 95 film. And the 90s movies, there's some classics in there. The late 80s, early 90s, there was a lot of care in movie making back then.
I gotta say, yeah, for being like a '90s movie, there's definitely has its like '90s things, but overall, the message, the characters in it, they really hold up. You can really connect with them, and I think obviously the visuals of the movie are stunning for '95. It looks really amazing. Overall, yeah, it's a really fun movie, and I would actually watch it again. I don't say that about too many movies, but it's fun enough for me to definitely watch it again. And I think with that, we are all done for today. So I want to thank everybody very much for tuning in, listening to us chat about The Indian in the Cupboard. Fun movie. Please check it out. And we'd love to hear your thoughts if you've seen it. Let us know what you think about it. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's fun. But that is 2 hours on a Sunday. I'm Nick.
And I'm Brian, and we'll catch you guys later.
Bye.